The old house stood on the edge of town, shrouded in a perpetual gloom. Locals whispered tales of tragedy and horror, each story more chilling than the last. It was the perfect place to summon Bloody Mary. 5 teenagers, fueled by bravado and cheap beer, huddled in the heart of the decaying mansion. The air hung heavy, thick with anticipation, and a fear they tried to mask with nervous laughter.
Are we really doing this?
Whispered Lucas, his voice betraying his bravado.
Don't be such a chicken, it's just a stupid story.
But her words lacked conviction, her eyes darting nervously around the darkened room. The ritual was simple, passed down through generations of whispered playground tales. It was a test of courage, a rite of passage that every child in the neighborhood knew by heart. The rules were clear: gather in a dark room, light a single candle, and chant the name 3 times. It was said that those who dared to complete the ritual would come face to face with the spirit of Bloody Mary herself. 3 times they chanted the name, their voices echoing in the cavernous room. Each syllable seemed to hang in the air, heavy with anticipation and fear. The room, once filled with nervous giggles and whispered doubts, now felt charged with an eerie energy.
Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary!
Silence met their final utterance. The room seemed to hold its breath along with them, the air thick with tension. Each teenager stood frozen, eyes wide, hearts pounding in their chests. The candle flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the peeling wallpaper. The shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, twisting and contorting into nightmarish shapes that played tricks on their minds. They held their breath, listening for any sign, any indication that their childish dare had been heard. The silence was deafening, each second stretching longer than the last. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of Lucas's watch amplified in the stillness. The sound was almost unbearable, a constant reminder of the passage of time and the growing sense of dread. Just when their fear began to dissipate, replaced by a wave of self-conscious relief, the mirror in the corner shivered. It was a subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a jolt of terror through the group. A low growl, almost imperceptible, seemed to emanate from its depths. It was a sound that defied explanation, a primal noise that sent shivers down their spines. The teenagers stared, their eyes wide with terror, as the reflection within the glass began to distort. Faces twisted into grotesque parodies of themselves, and the room seemed to close in around them. The ritual had worked, and now they were face to face with the consequences of their actions. The next morning, a strange uneasiness settled over the group. It was as if the air itself had thickened, making it hard to breathe, and every sound seemed amplified, echoing in their minds. The events of the previous night, initially dismissed as their imaginations running wild, took on a sinister new light. They had heard noises, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and shadows that moved just out of sight. It began subtly, a creeping sense of dread, an unshakable feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside seemed to carry a hidden menace. They tried to brush it off, to convince themselves it was just paranoia, the byproduct of their own fear. They laughed nervously, made jokes, and tried to distract themselves with mundane activities, but the signs were impossible to ignore. Strange occurrences became more frequent. Objects would be found in places they hadn't been left, and there were cold spots in the house that seemed to move. Mirrors, once mundane objects, now filled them with a sense of unease. Reflections seemed to linger a moment too long, and sometimes they thought they saw something moving behind them. There were whispers, too, faint and indistinct, that seemed to follow them, weaving in and out of their waking moments. They would hear their names being called when no one was there, and conversations that stopped abruptly when they entered a room. They were always just out of reach, gone before they could be identified, leaving behind a chilling residue of fear. The teenagers knew something was terribly wrong, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. The feeling of being watched, the whispers, the shadows, they all pointed to something lurking just beyond their understanding, something that was slowly closing in on them. Days turned into a waking nightmare. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, slithering into their thoughts, whispering their names in the dead of night. They were haunted by fleeting glimpses, shadows that darted at the edge of their vision, reflections that didn't belong. Sleep offered no escape. Nightmares plagued them, vivid and terrifying, each one ending with the same horrifying image. a woman with eyes filled with endless sorrow, her face obscured by a veil of blood. They were trapped in a spiral of fear, each passing moment tightening its grip. Their youthful arrogance had vanished, replaced by a bone-deep terror they couldn't escape. Section 5. Bloody Tears. The mirror in Ashley's bathroom was the first to bleed. It was an ordinary morning when she noticed the first drop. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a mere illusion. But as she leaned closer, the truth became undeniable. Thick, viscous crimson oozed from the cracks, staining the porcelain sink below. The sight was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a grotesque dance of blood that seemed to have a life of its own. Each drop echoed in the silent room, amplifying the dread that gripped her heart. She screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror, as the reflection staring back at her began to cry tears of blood. Panic set in. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Was this a nightmare? A hallucination? But the cold, sticky blood on her hands was all too real. They were no longer dealing with harmless pranks or figments of their imagination. The group of friends, once skeptical and dismissive, now stood united in their fear. The reality of their situation was sinking in, and it was far more terrifying than any ghost story they had ever heard. This was something far more sinister, something ancient and evil that they had unwittingly unleashed. The symbols they had found, the artifacts they had disturbed, all pointed to a dark history that was now coming to life. They had opened a door that should have remained closed. They were out of their depth, desperately searching for a way to undo what they had done. Books, old manuscripts, anything that might hold a clue. But the more they searched, the more hopeless it seemed. The answers were elusive, hidden in the shadows of time. But fear, they soon realized, was a relentless adversary, one that clouded their judgment and threatened to consume them entirely. The shadowy figure that lurked in the corners of their vision was a constant reminder of their impending doom. They had to act fast, but every step forward seemed to lead them deeper into the darkness. Section 6. The Mirror Cracks. One by one, mirrors in their homes began to crack, each fracture a jagged line of dread. The whispers intensified, becoming taunting voices that echoed their deepest fears. Sleep became impossible, every waking moment a torment. They sought answers in ancient texts, their desperation mounting with each passing day. The legend was real, more terrifying than they could have imagined. Bloody Mary, they learned, was not a harmless game, but a vengeful spirit, driven by an insatiable hunger for souls, and they, in their youthful arrogance, had invited her into their lives. Section 7. 7 days, 7 days. The legend spoke of 7 days of torment, 7 days of fear, culminating in a final, terrifying confrontation. 7 days until Bloody Mary claimed her due. Time became their enemy, each tick of the clock pushing them closer to the precipice of despair. They were living on borrowed time, their every breath laced with fear. They had to find a way to break the curse, to appease the vengeful spirit before it was too late. But how do you reason with a being born of darkness, a creature fueled by centuries of pain and suffering? Section 8. She's still out there. They never spoke of that night again, the night they came face to face with the embodiment of their fears. The memory lingered, a chilling reminder of their mortality, of the darkness that lurked just beyond their perception. The whispers eventually faded, the nightmares subsided, but the fear remained, a constant companion. They had escaped with their lives, but something had changed within them, a fundamental shift that left them forever marked. The house on the edge of town still stood, a silent sentinel to their folly, and deep within its decaying walls, behind the shattered glass of 1,000 mirrors, Bloody Mary waited. Section 9. Don't look in the mirror. They say if you listen closely on the quietest of nights, you can still hear her voice, a mournful whisper carried on the wind, a reminder that some doors once opened can never be closed. So be careful who you summon in the dark, for the shadows hold many secrets, some best left undisturbed. And remember, when you look into a mirror, be sure of who or what is looking back. Don't say you weren't warned.
The shadows are restless tonight, and so are we. If you're brave enough, hit that like button. Let us know what you think in the comments. and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories that lurk just around the corner.